Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Learn with Jason. Today on the show, we're bringing back Ben Myers. Ben, how you doing?
I'm doing great. And yourself, Jason?
I'm doing so good. I'm so happy to have you back. I am really looking forward today for a few reasons. One, it's always wonderful to have you around. Two, we're going to play with Eleventy, which is just, as we've kind of learned through painful experience on this show, just means we're going to do puns all day. Um, and three, we're going to play with serverless functions, which are all things that I enjoy. So,
Yeah,
before we
absolutely.
get too deep into here, do you want to give us a little bit of background on yourself for folks who aren't familiar with your work?
Sure. I am a software developer at Microsoft. I focus on the front end, and specifically, I focus on accessibility and core web technologies. I'm an advocate for web accessibility, both like internally at my company, as well as folks probably know me from. I host a weekly stream called Some Antics, where I bring on guests in a format very inspired from Learn with Jason. I bring on guests from around the web dev industry to teach something about building great user experiences for the web in a hands-on way with a focus on accessibility and core web technologies. Can you tell I've rehearsed that elevator pitch, Jason? Um, man. But yeah, so I stream about accessibility. I blog about accessibility. Every once in a while, Eleventy comes up. That's another favorite subject of mine. And so I'm super thrilled to be bringing that to Learn with Jason today.
I am super happy to have you here because I think it's going to be a lot of fun. And yeah, I think in color contrast checkers are something that
Yeah.
I am fascinated by. Uh, I remember I've watched, like, at one point Chris Biscardi tried to build one that it was doing luminosity checking. It was using like an
Mm.
H. I think it wasn't even HSL. It was something that was really cool stuff. And yeah, just a lot of exciting things happening in that space. But it's also one of those things where I am so dependent on the robots because I don't really know how to check color contrast. I just put my
Oh
two
yeah.
values into a form, and if it gives me a thumbs up, I just continue about my business. So I'm really excited to talk about that and kind of learn how it all works today.
Yeah, so
Um,
unfortunately, we're not going to get a whole lot into the science of the color contrast or the math. This isn't so much about color contrast itself, so much as using
sure,
color contrast as like a good use case for serverless.
gotcha.
Um, that said, contrast is a fascinating, complex subject. I know you've had Todd Libby on recently to talk about color contrast, but it itself is a huge subject with a ton of nuance. And it's an ever growing field, ever changing field. So we're going to be using the standard color contrast formula from WCAG 2.
Okay.
That's the one that's been vetted, all the places, user tested, stuff like that. But it's ever a growing science. And you may hear in the coming years, the web content accessibility guidelines might move to a new color contrast algorithm that's supposed to make scoring a little more natural for folks.
Sure. Yeah, and I do think that is a good one. Oh, and Brian is already sharing links in the chat to that Todd Lippy episode. Why do I keep saying Lippy? Todd Libby with a B. Uh,
Mhm.
all right, so let's maybe start with the basics. So
Mhm.
the foundation for everything that we're going to be doing today is Eleventy,
Yes.
and maybe let's just start there. What is Eleventy and why should people be excited about it?
That is an amazing place to start. So, Eleventy is a static site generator. Specifically, it is the style of static site generator. Try saying that 10 times fast. That really borrows from Jekyll. So the idea here is I have some content, I have some data. I'd like to mash these two together and get static assets, usually HTML. There are, of course, tons of different ways you can do a static site generator. On the completely like other side of the spectrum, you've got like your Gatsby's, which uh, my understanding is they really create JavaScript apps, but with a fast forerunner of HTML that then gets replaced with a
Mm,
bunch of JavaScript. So the Jekylls and Eleventys of the world are focused a lot more on like we're just going to create some HTML. It's going to be nice and lightweight. Your users aren't downloading a bunch of JavaScript. They're not making like client side API calls or anything like that. It's very fast, very cacheable. And so that's really at the heart of what Eleventy is just taking content, taking data, mashing them together, creating some, lovely, boring HTML, which is going to be reliable and fast for your users.
You know what I love about that argument though is like what we I feel like what we've done in our heads a little bit as developers is we've said like just HTML and CSS is not
Mhm.
enough, right? And I think that we at some point we kind of flipped the script on this a little bit
Yeah.
where we stopped thinking that like at the bottom of most of what we're doing, I'm trying to put some words on a page and maybe a picture
Mhm.
or two so that I can convey information from me to you.
Yeah.
And what I love about tools like Eleventy is they're challenging the idea that has emerged in the the late 2000s to today that in order to build a great website you have to start with JavaScript.
Yes.
Now, I am a largely a JavaScript developer, and I'm a huge
Mhm.
fan of building really interactive sites with a lot of JavaScript engagement and all that good stuff. But I'm not fully sold that you can't build great websites without JavaScript.
So what we're gonna do today is we're gonna build this color contrast, and at first it's going to have zero client-side navigation, or sorry, zero
Oh,
client-side JavaScript. It's
all
gonna
right.
be like it's gonna have not navigation, it's gonna have some interaction even, but zero client-side JavaScript. Mainly just to show you just how far we can take the platform, so long as we have the server or serverless functions backing us up. Um, and I think it's interesting that you note that like we talk about just HTML and just CSS because I think there's some truth to that. But I think that's been helped by the platform itself getting a lot better over the past few
Yeah.
years. Um, HTML's capabilities have grown. Like we only recently got the details summary element. That's a lovely bit of like interactive elements that we can use that have the progressive enhancement just built right into it. So there's been that. I think there's also been this growing consciousness around accessibility. Like web accessibility is not a new subject. We've been discussing this since the early 90s was like
Mm-hmm.
that was when the first draft of the web content accessibility guidelines came out. The first web accessibility court case was settled in like 2000 or 2001 with Bank of America. Like this isn't a new subject by any stretch, but the growing consciousness around accessibility has caused a lot more people to interrogate their relationship to semantic markup and just how
Mm.
far the platform can take us when we keep things in very expressive markup that um, you know doesn't just help developers like understand like oh this part of the page is the header or this is the nav, but also helps machines devices really understand our page and take it to the next level, providing user experiences such as search engines or screen reader support. And we've started to see how these things, having a really robust foundation of our markup, really enables something far more than we expected.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And that's actually something that I've really loved to see as time has gone on is that the way that we can write with HTML, it's starting to
Mhm.
feel like even if you don't apply CSS to the page, you can really create expressive documents now with just HTML with that, that you mentioned that detail summary element. I live and die by that thing. I use that so
Yes.
much because I always want to just toggle extra information on screen where it's like,
Yeah.
look, I know that you don't really need this context, but I like to have it, and I figure some nerd
Mhm.
out there also wants to have it. So let me say like, hey, if you want to go deeper, here's some side stuff. And I don't really want
Yeah.
to spin up another page for that, right?
And you want and you want that with sensible defaults too, right? Like
Yeah.
you don't want to have to figure out how do I accessibly implement an accordion. Like let me figure that out. That's the stuff I
Yes.
live and die by, right? But you want something that's easy to use and provides a sensible default experience out of the box that should be roughly accessible. There's HTML is not always accessible out of the box, but it's almost definitely better than rolling your own solution unless you've like done a lot of research.
Right.
So yeah, just leverage that like the pit of success, right? Make things just incredibly easy to create a robust, performant, accessible experience just by using some well-named tags.
100%. Okay. So you got me sold on Eleventy. I
Mhm.
am all in on this. We should be building websites that allow us to, minimize the amount of
Mhm.
stuff the user needs to deal with to get the content, which is the part that I care about, to their browser.
Yes.
Um, So the other half of this today is serverless, which you lightly touched on. But let's talk a little bit about, when we're talking about this idea of delivering less JavaScript to the user, of using semantic HTML and CSS, because we're going to write serverless functions in JavaScript. So how does this play into that world of Node.js?
I'm sorry, of what JS?
Like Node.js,
Node.js.
like shipping Node.js.
So Eleventy is great. It's a great tool. I like it. At least it serves my mental model of I want to be as close as possible to the market. But historically, it's had this not even problem, I would say a gap of like everything is built during the build step, right? All of your HTML is pre-rendered, it's on the CDN, it lives there, right? And so if you wanted an Eleventy site that had any degree of like dynamic or real-time content, you were going to have to ship a bunch of like JavaScript in your Eleventy site. Like you would open up like a script tag or something, or you would have script source equals, and you would have to load in some like extra JavaScript. And Eleventy doesn't really make that easy. It's not about like serving client-side scripts.
Right.
So you'd have to do a whole bunch of workarounds, and those workarounds aren't going to be anything new. Like this is how the web has worked for a long time, is having that client-side logic. But with a lot of that, you lose kind of the cache benefit, right? Because the scripts are cached, but the end result of the scripts are not cached.
Right.
And so every client now has to recompute all these things, do all the work, all the stuff that you were trying to avoid with Eleventy in the first place. So there's been this gap. And previously, if you wanted like totally like dynamic stuff, you might actually consider going to a different tool. Like Eleventy previously would have made this so nigh impossible for you to use that like you would just opt to like say like, okay, I guess I'll just build this as a React app or something like that to get that kind of dynamic React router behavior. So yeah, what we'll see here is by running Eleventy in a serverless function, which is what's going to happen here, we can respond to requests as they come in, create pages in real time. Netlify's on-demand builders make it fairly straightforward for us to cache those pages. But we can respond to any arbitrary input we need without knowing that ahead of time. We're building a color contrast checker, and you think about if there's 256 values for one color channel, and there's 3 color channels in a given color, and then there's 2 colors, the math on that gets exorbitant. It's something like you'd be creating like 2.75 times 10 to the 14th pages for like to get every pair of colors represented in RGB space. And I don't know about you, but I don't feel like doing my part to ensure the early demise of our environment by rebuilding all of those things. Just imagine like building those pages. They're all built. It took forever, right? And then you realize you made a mistake in the footer. There's a typo you have to correct.
Right.
And now you have to rebuild that, not just in your Netlify build step, but also your dev server and all that kind of stuff. Like you're going to pay that pain like a lot. You're going to pay that cost a lot. And so being able to say, hey, I don't need to know about all my pages ahead of time. I can, have my core site be built during the build step, but then I can specify certain pages to be built by a serverless function when they're requested. It lets us cut down on our build step, which makes things just vastly more efficient if you've got a whole bunch of pages that in all likelihood aren't going to see the light of day. And it also means that you can pull in arbitrary input from the user, such as query parameters or path parameters in the URL, so you can get some dynamic like per page behavior that you don't even need to know all the input ahead of time. You also can get some real-time stuff. You can pull, you can use that serverless function, the serverlessly invoked Eleventy, to request an API and get the latest and greatest and up-to-datest content.
Latest and greatest and up-to-datest. I love that.
You got it. It's the hot new slang. All the kids are saying it. All the kids are saying it. It's the latest, greatest, up-to-date slang, Jason. Welcome. You've brought the youths. Anyways, this is my stream now.
Oh my goodness. All right. So Yeah, I think this is some really exciting stuff, and I think like from my standpoint, what I'm hearing is that this is a great way for certain
Mhm.
use cases to hit
Yes.
the right compromise of you get all the functionality you need for dynamic content, for being able to respond to user input, but you're not trading off by saying the rest of the content on your site that
Mhm.
isn't dynamic or responding to user input, that doesn't have to be rendered dynamically. It doesn't have to be, we don't have to ship
Yes.
JavaScript to do that. And this other part of it, which is that because this data is what we could say functionally pure, the same input gets the same output every time. So if we have the same URL, we know that we're going to get the same page. So we can build it exactly once the first time that it gets requested and then
Yes.
cache it forever as if it were statically generated in the first place.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
that is pretty powerful stuff. Like that gives me as a developer quite a bit of flexibility to go a long ways with what
Mhm.
a static, what somebody might consider a static site generator. It's not
Yeah.
really so static anymore, but it gives me that same benefit of like build once and cache forever.
Absolutely. And you don't have to overhaul your whole project to make it work. So long as your Eleventy project is in 1.0, you can opt into Eleventy Serverless. And Eleventy Serverless is going to be opt in on a template by template basis, which
Oh, cool.
for those who are not into Eleventy spaces, I'll quickly define a template, which is a file that has your content and is parsed with a templating language such as Nunjux or Liquid or anything to like insert your data into. So it's a content file that gets transformed into usually HTML. And so when I'm saying you opt into 11D serverless on a template by template basis, non 11D folks should probably interpret that as you're opting into it on a page by page basis or a page type by page type basis. And we'll see what
Absolutely.
that looks like very shortly. But that means your whole site is not suddenly being served serverlessly. Your site is, for the most part, being served exactly as it was, except for this one page that's now dynamic.
Mm-hmm. So, I mean, this sounds really promising, and I'm feeling pretty hyped about it. So let me take the counter stance here and just ask, where is this going to fall down? Like, if I'm a developer trying to measure the trade-offs of a given technology, when is this not the right solution?
Yeah, I still think that highly dynamic experiences are not really what 11 is for. There are projects that are trying to solve that. You had Ben Holmes on recently,
Hmm.
my doppelganger, to talk about islands architecture and Slinkity. And there are projects like that that exist, but overall, I'm still personally of the mindset that if you're going like high dynamic, high interactive experiences, 11 serverless isn't going to save the day for you. I think that you're still better suited going to tools that are more focused around that interactive experience. Um,
For sure.
so that I think is still a gap there. Maybe not even a gap. It's just not what 11 is for, right? Projects don't have to be for every project. That's okay, right? I'm not
Right.
saying build everything with 11D. I'm not saying build everything without 11D, right? Like 11D is really, really great for content that is mostly static, right? Like could be represented as just HTML.
You're
Uh,
touching on something that is very near and dear to my heart. As I've gotten more experienced, as I've climbed up what I guess you would call the developer maturity curve, I've started to realize that any time that I smell somebody saying that this tool will solve all your problems, this tool will
mhm.
accomplish whatever you need it to, I immediately start to pull back a little bit and I go, okay, it's time for me to do more research because
Yeah.
clearly somebody who's telling me this is like the universal solution is selling something, right?
Yes.
And
Yeah.
where really I see like a really experienced developer is looking at tools pragmatically and recognizing that you're going to reach for different tools for different outcomes. Even in relatively similar spaces, you're going to find that it's more suitable to use one framework for, say, an e-commerce versus another one that is a
Mhm.
paid subscription, which both are like, I need people to come to a website and give me money. uh, but the use cases are just different enough that it might be a different tool that makes that more functional, more available, right?
Absolutely.
And so yeah, I love to hear people say that you should weigh your use case, chat. You can't
Mhm.
just go to me and say what should I use, and I rattle off whatever the thing I'm excited about today
Yeah.
is, right? Or go to Ben and ask the same question. You gotta kind of weigh the what problem does this solve. And so today
Yeah.
we're solving the problem of I have
Mhm.
mostly static content. Some
Yep.
of it will vary based on user input, but it won't vary every time it loads. It varies once per unique URL.
Yes.
And I want my build times to be fast, despite
Yes.
having a large possible number of combinations in that variable user input. A potentially infinite number of combinations, really.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. Absolutely. And so a way to view Eleventy serverless is absolutely like not the cure all, right? But rather it closes a gap that Eleventy had, which is that
Right.
Eleventy was not built to deal with dynamic inputs. Now Eleventy is built to deal with dynamic inputs. So if that was a need you had, you no longer have to look elsewhere. You could better consider Eleventy for your needs.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, that's great. Okay. So at this point, I think probably the best thing we can do is start showing everybody how it works. So
Let's do it.
first, let me do a quick shout out to the chat. Y'all, thank you all for showing up. I see a whole bunch of folks in here. I see Michael Chan's in there, David Darns, Brian Robinson, who's been dropping links all day. Brittany's in there, Steph, Cyrus. What's up, y'all? Thank you all so much for hanging out today. I know I didn't mention everybody because my memory's not that good, and I'm sorry. But thank you all for hanging out. Thank you for the sub. I saw Real Atomic Jeep, I think was the username. Thank you for subscribing, and I appreciate that a whole lot. Also, how do I look today, y'all? I'm using a new tool, so I've been using Ping for a while, and then I switched over to a new camera. This is a Sony FX3, which I'm thrilled about. And then
Mhm.
I also got a new way to hook it in so that I can get like 1080p at 30 frames per second, something like that. I don't know. It's very like everything is very fancy. I only marginally understand it, but I should be really sharp. So shout out to Ping for actually letting me stream at that high quality. Um,
Yeah.
I'll drop a quick link to Ping in the chat for anybody who is streaming and wants to check this out. And with that, let's switch over into pair programming view, and I'll give a couple more shout outs. Here we go. Camera 2. All right. So first and foremost, we are having this episode live captioned like all of our episodes. I broke something on the homepage of the site, so to see the captions, you can see those right over at streamtext.net. That is going to be all of the captions for today's show. These will also be included on the YouTube video and on the learnwithjason.dev site for the episode. That is made possible through the support of our sponsors. We've got Netlify, NX, and Backlight all kicking in to make this show a little more accessible and to help me cover all of the other costs of running this show, like, for example, upgrading camera gear and paying for streaming tools. So thank you all very much for making this show possible. You are also talking to Ben Myers today, so make sure you go and follow Ben on the Twitter. We're talking about Eleventy. Link's already been dropped, but I'll drop it again. And we talked a little bit about Todd Libby. Let's make sure we get one more link to Todd out there. We talked about Ben Holmes's Slinkity. There we go. And that is now the extent of what I know. So let me hand it back over to you and just ask what should we do next?
Okay, so I created a bit of a starter repo for us to work with. The reason being that I wanted us to not spend a whole lot of time on the Eleventy setup. I also wanted to just preload things with styles. This repo is not terribly fancy at all. It's just got a few, like it's got styles wired up basically, and it's got a template in there already. So we're going to be adding Eleventy to this. And so yeah, and in fact might as well put a link to that in the chat as well because why not?
Yeah.
There we go. Cool. I am allowed to post links in this chat. All too powerful. But yeah, so this is I tried to keep things as like pared down and minimal and unfancy as possible, just because I don't personally like it when like pre-existing things get in the way of learning what it is we're learning. So as you can see, we've got one template in here. which is index.md. And it's fairly boring. It's going to help us get started. We've got a layout called page.html. If you pop that open, we've got ourselves a fairly bog standard HTML boilerplate. This contains our fonts and our style as well. So this is basically all we really have setup wise. I've
Nice.
preloaded a bunch of things just to look pretty.
And
Style-wise.
some pretty straightforward styles. It looks like nothing
Yep.
too much, about 100 lines of CSS here.
Yeah.
And then in our eleventy.js, all we did was move everything into a source folder. No other bits, right?
And you can see that we've got add pass-through copy, add watch target for our styles. So if we change our styles, then they'll get loaded into the new build. So overall, a fundamentally unfancy project to start off with. Just didn't want to spend a whole lot of time on your 11D boilerplate, more or less.
Perfect.
And yeah, this is where we are to start. If you click that get starting link, it'll break because this page doesn't exist. We're going to create it. And I've already preloaded it with some query parameters because, well, we'll see. So, yeah. Any questions about this boilerplate before we get started?
No, I'm feeling pretty solid about this. This it all makes sense to me. Anything that we write in here will get dropped into this page.html as the content tag. Our styles are getting loaded right here. And I understand how the CSS and HTML relationship works.
Cool.
Anything that's in source is what Eleventy is going to target. And yeah, I think I've got about as much context as I can get. Chad, if you've got questions, as always, please drop them in there. We'll answer them as we go.
So I thought what we could do is we could build a template for our color contrast ratio. Not even start it as serverless, just make a hard-coded template with like hard-coded values.
Okay.
And then we'll kind of add in the dynamic stuff as we go.
Perfect. I'm ready.
So let's go ahead and create a new template. And I would say call this contrast.html. Templates can come in a lot of different extensions. Markdown is the most common, but for today, we're going to just get, we're going to stay as close to the markup as possible. And I find it just easier to do this as an HTML file.
Okay.
Let's start with a bit of front matter. So we're going to add in our layout. This will give us the styles and that main tag and everything. Oh, there we go.
Got some very helpful Emmet extensions happening right now.
Yeah. Let's go ahead and add ourselves an H1. Probably have that be something like hash FFFF and hash 000000. That's probably the wrong number of F's and zeros, but you know what I mean. Have a contrast ratio of, and then underneath it, we're going to use an element that is not often talked about. Folks in the chat are going to be screaming that I'm about to bring up the DL. I'm not going to bring up the DL. That brand was so, a few months ago. Instead, I'm going to introduce you to the output element, which is designed to represent the results of a form submission. And has
okay.
Yeah.
I've literally never seen this before. This is entirely new to me.
Yeah. It is. So the output element, for anyone who's unaware, represents the results of a form submission, usually a calculation. It also counts as a live region, which in accessibility speak means that as you update the output element, it'll announce the changes to screen readers and other assistive technologies.
That is killer, because that's a whole thing that we struggle with, right? When we're showing output, when we put it in a div, it doesn't tell anybody that we changed it. So then we find ourselves writing all these like area attributes, and those are super confusing and easy to get wrong. So if I just use this output element instead, it'll work just like a div in terms of how I can style it, but it'll automatically trigger the assistive tech when it changes.
Yes, and actually, technically, it works more like a span because.
So I'd have to like make it display block and all that good stuff.
Yeah, and I've done that in the styles for you. But if you're curious, the specs define a whole bunch of different kinds of elements for different kinds of content. So there's like your phrasing content tags, which are like your span, B, I, strong, M, anchor, etc. Like those are things that you would more or less expect to see like inside a paragraph tag.
Mm-hmm.
And then there are like your sectioning elements and stuff like that. So technically, output's more like a span, but whatever. Um, so
Also,
yeah.
chat, are
Okay.
you making fun of the way that I just said? Is it? It's not area, is it? It's aria.
It's Arya typically, but
Fine. Okay. Uh, so inside of this, I can just put whatever I want. Is that right?
yeah. So let's go ahead and put 21.00:1. If you're unfamiliar with color contrast ratios, a 21-to-1 ratio is the highest contrast ratio you can have. That's what you get if you compare black and white.
Okay. And I think I misunderstood. You want me to put this inside the
Oh
H1?
no, that it's just its own thing.
It's its own
It'll
thing.
be outside the H1. Yeah. We could put the output inside a paragraph tag if we wanted to be like technically like very correct. Um, but yeah,
I love
there
being
you
very
go.
correct.
Very correct is good. Yeah, so let's go ahead and save this and let's take a look at this. This is going to have been built so that we could access it at /contrast/. There we go. Um,
Oh, neat.
it's yeah, it's
Oh, so I need
decently
to get rid
looking.
of
I
my
think overall.
X.
You what? Oh
I
yeah,
I okay.
cool. So now we've got our little template, but this is being built ahead of time, and it's being built with hard-coded values, right? So this is
Mm-hmm.
not that. I mean, this is not really what we want, right? This right here is a fundamentally useless page. It tells you exactly one contrast ratio, and it's the one that most accessibly folks know off the top of their head, which is black and white have a contrast ratio of 21-to-1, which is the max. So we want to make it dynamic. We want to add serverless so that this gets rendered with whatever input you provided. Um,
Right.
cool. So let's go ahead and stop the dev server for this. And while you're at it, let's go ahead and also remove the underscore site directory. That's the built output because it's already created a contrast page for us, an HTML page for us there. We don't need that anymore. That's not going to be in the build. So, all right. Now to add serverless to our project, first of all, you're going to want to be in 11.1.0.0, which is what we have in the project. And let's go ahead and go to our .eleventy.js file, which is, so this is our configuration for our project. This is how we tell Eleventy what to do, how to be, how to live its life. If you go up to the very top of this, we're going to import very, very top. Yeah, we're going to go ahead and require something from the @eleventy/eleventy library. So this is going to be a destructured import. So yeah, I would definitely go about it in that order. And this right here is going to be a plugin. So Eleventy Serverless is technically a plugin that you have to like add to your project. So just start typing like capital E Eleventy, and it's going to be Eleventy Serverless Bundler plugin, all one word.
Bundler plugin. There it is.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So this is the plugin that we're going to add. So now we have to add this to our configuration. So yep, it's going to be 11config.add plugin.
I love TypeScript autocomplete.
So I recently started adding. You'll notice there's the JS stock comment above this function,
Uh-huh.
and I've recently like that's now in my default like install because otherwise you just do not get this IntelliSense for your 11D config. So I highly recommend this this JS stock setup, which I
So
think I
good.
found. We've got a question in the chat about what's a color contrast checker. You feed it two colors. In our case, we're going to feed it two hex codes, and it tells you the ratio between them. A higher ratio means the colors have a higher contrast, which means that for people with visual disabilities, it's going to be a lot easier for them to make out content with that higher ratio.
And
So
we can show this straight up, right? Like if I if I go to the color, it's in line, isn't it?
I think so.
Let's see if I can find it.
Um,
I might have to add a color on it. Let me do an
Yeah.
element style. Color will go right. And then if I click this, we can see the color contrast here. But if I start changing this color, we can see
Yeah.
the number is getting smaller. This is very tiny. Let me try again. And so as I go lower, that's harder to read and see it's saying like, hey, people can't read this. And so my eyes are straining a little bit. And if we get really low, it's like, oh boy, I can't see that at all. But as we make it bigger, because this is giant text, once we get above, what is it, like 3?
So according to the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, there are basically 2 main ratio thresholds you need to care about. A 3-to-1 is sufficient for large text, which is, there's a whole definition, but basically it's like 18 pixel font or like 14 in bold or something like that. I forget exactly what it is, but like large text needs to meet a 3-to-1, normal size text needs to meet a 4.5-to-1. And so that's why contrast checkers like this are helpful, is they enable you to basically like give it the 2 numbers that you're looking to like add to your design system and go, yep, these work well together.
Yeah, and this is like this particular tool I use all the time, and having something where I could just throw in the 2 values is also hugely helpful. There's another question about these JS doc comments up at the top here.
Oh, yes.
So do you want to maybe just give us a quick overview of how this works?
Yes, and JS comment, I'm going to put the link to that in the chat. It's jsdoc.app. This is a special syntax for comments. You'll notice that this comment block actually starts with 2 asterisks. This is a special syntax for comments that enables you to effectively provide like metadata about the variables and functions that you're writing. JSDoc, and there's a couple of similar syntaxes for other languages like Java. These kind of doc comment syntaxes were originally designed with the ability that you could like basically build, like statically build documentation pages out of your code if you included comments about what your code does next to it. So it's a special syntax that's meant for that. However, VS Code has this added feature where it basically uses JSDoc comments as hints for its TypeScript server, which means that as you're describing, like, oh, you're saying like, oh, this is a string or this is an array of numbers or something like that, even though it's just a comment, it ends up under the surface being interpreted as basically types. And so that means you get the whole advantage of like IntelliSense and autocomplete and stuff like that. It's brilliant. It is, if you're like me and you don't want to hop into TypeScript wholesale, this is absolutely an incremental way to start benefiting from it already. You don't have to introduce a compiler step or anything. Your editor just does it for you. It's such a time saver. It's lovely.
I feel like this was the moment where I like opened my heart to TypeScript, really. Was when I realized that you could use these JS doc inclusions, because the thing that I love about TypeScript is this idea of being able to like, I hit dot and then I can just see what's here. I can see the methods and things like that. That is unbelievably helpful as you are starting to work. It's just, it's so good. And the like full on like migrate everything to TypeScript is daunting, but this is really handy, right?
Oh no, your code is more expressive too. Oh no. This is absolutely going to make it through team review. Oh no. Yeah. I love it. This is such a superpower for any like front end developer to have, or any JavaScript developer really to have in their toolkit, is JSDoc. Absolutely take the time to learn it, because it's, if you don't want to make the full like TypeScript conversion, this itself is entirely worth it.
I'm getting compliments on my shirt and it's distracting me. Thank you. This is a Wes Boss shirt, actually. Can everybody see it? This is the Wes Boss. Wait, where's the light? Here's the light. It's the Wes Boss JavaScript shirt.
Oh yeah.
So it's a good one. I like that one. Wes just dropped another $5 sticker pack. Also, I don't know if he sold out yet, but they looked fun. So y'all should go get those. I don't even know how to find them, so just go look, I guess.
Shall we continue adding our serverless?
We probably should, right?
Okay. So we're going to need to give it a few configurations. So as a second argument to the add plugin method, we're going to pass an object. And for this object, we unfortunately don't get autocomplete for this, but we're going to have to give it two things.
Okay.
The first thing we're going to tell it is where our serverless functions are going to live. And because in this household we stand Netlify, we're going to have this be the Netlify functions directory. So
Okay.
let's pass it a property called functions_dir. And this is going to be a string netlify /functions. And then the second thing that we're going to pass it is a bit curious. This is going to be a name. So the property is name. And what this represents is the name of our serverless function. So we may, depends as kind of a crunch stretch goal, we may add multiple instances of the serverless bundler plugin to do different things. But you can actually add the serverless plugin multiple times to your project, and each instance will handle things in a different way because they're associated with different serverless functions that could do different things like validate your parameters, for instance, or cleanse your parameters, right? You know, no one wants to just willy-nilly introduce user input into their site. That's a bad idea for security reasons. So maybe you want to do some validation. You can do that validation in your serverless function. And so now your serverless functions have like you have this flexibility with being able to use multiple serverless functions for your Eleventy serverless. So let's give this the name on request. You can call this whatever you want, but this is typically what I've been going with.
Okay.
Because to start off, we're just going to have it generate the page on every request. We're not going to start with caching with on-demand builders because I think that should be a stretch goal. So on request. So let's save this. And let's go ahead and start our dev server, and then we're going to observe some changes to our project.
Oops. Oh, it's working anyways. Okay, here we go.
All right. So first of all, if you look at the _site directory in our code base, we're going to see that there is... I thought... Oh, right. Okay, yes. So there is this... on request serverless function. And a lot of the stuff is, all of the stuff has been automatically generated for us. Really, the only thing we care about is the index.js page here. This is the serverless function that we control. Everything else gets auto-generated for us and will be rebuilt with every CI/CD pipeline. So we can actually go ahead and ignore that. Let's go to our git ignore and add a few lines real quick. And so this first line is going to be netlify /functions /on request /**. And then we're going to follow this up with exclamation point netlify functions on request index.js. And so what this does is this ignores every file in our on request serverless function folder except for index.js. So that way Netlify is able to rebuild all of the other things based on your project state. We don't touch those, so we just let Netlify do the work for us.
Great.
Cool. Yeah, so everything else is exactly identical, right? You can see that in our _site directory, we still have all of the same content we would have had, right? We have our contrast page, our index.html. All of our templates are still being built ahead of time as they should be. So we haven't changed anything about our project so far. We haven't even made any of our templates serverless. So let's go ahead and do that real quick. Can you kill the dev server once more and delete your site directory once more? I promise we'll get to the point where we aren't deleting our site, but just for some initial setup. What we now want to do is we want to tell Eleventy that our contrast.html template is a serverless template. It should be rendered on request. And so to do this, you're right, it would be in the front matter. There's long been a permalink property for our front matter that you can specify. And this is usually to set a different output path. So you say I know that my template is called this, but I actually want it to be accessible with a different URL.
Right, because by default, it's just going to use the file name. So we created contrast.html, so our permalink is /contrast. If we set permalink hello, then it ignores this, and this would be available here instead.
Yes. And so Eleventy Serverless introduces a slightly different syntax. It's going to be permalink, but you're still going to have it the way you had it. It's just now you're going to go to a new line, and you're going to do, yep, you've got two spaces. That is YAML's version of an indentation. And
YAML,
now what we're
YAML,
going to do,
YAML,
JSON, yep.
YAML.
Um, you're welcome. And so what we're going to do now is we're going to put the name that we gave our serverless function. So this is on request. So this specifically matches that name attribute in our .11t.js. And now we can give it a path, and our path is going to be /contrast/.
Okay.
All right, and we're going to go ahead and save this. So this says, hey, if someone tries to access the route /contrast/, then instead redirect them to our on request serverless function. And that's going to provide the output for us.
Okay.
And this is, we've created a YAML object. You could, there's a whole lot of fun stuff you could do. You could technically provide an array of values for this. So you could say multiple routes are actually governed by the same serverless function. But for today, here's how we're going to do it. So let's go ahead and save this, rerun, and let's go to our /contrast route. There we go. If you go to that, if you go to /contrast/, it's going to come up. It came up exactly the way it has. However, if you check your terminal, you're going to see that it actually said, that was redirecting you to the serverless function. If you were to check your _ site, you won't actually find contrast.html in there anymore. The only thing that exists, so that HTML does not exist anymore, but you were still served it. Because it's now being generated by your serverless function. How are we doing so far?
We're killing it. Even with me screwing around, you're doing a great job.
All right. But this still isn't very helpful for us. We need to start accepting some user input, right? And so Eleventy exposes information about the Eleventy exposes information about the user's input, typically query parameters and URL parameters, as data. Eleventy has this concept of data, which I would basically define as like variables that are accumulated for every template that can be injected into your page using templating syntax. We'll see what that means. So let's replace that first hex code that you've got, that hard-coded hex code in your H1. Let's go ahead and replace that, and the octothorpe as well, with double curly boys.
Double curly boys.
Double curly boys. I may also call them handlebars from time to time. But in here, I want you to stick, and this is not going to be trivial, eleventy.serverless.query.foreground.
Oh, I can't even spell Eleventy. Serverless.query.foreground. How close did I get?
You got it. I'm going to reply to Cyrus here, who asks, so you can access all the variables in all templates. Not quite. Eleventy has a whole order of operations for aggregating data for each template so that every template can have its unique set of data. This is a process called the Eleventy data cascade. And I see that Brian Robinson's posted a link to a talk I gave about that. But I'm also going to link a blog post that I'm really proud of about the data cascade. Unfortunately, we just don't have a whole lot of time to dive into that today. So what this does is this says, hey, take the query parameters, the foreground and background query parameters, and just plop that into our page. And so that's what we've got. So now if we go back to our localhost in our browser, we can change those query parameters, and it should work for us. You're not actually supplying those query parameters right now.
But this is good because it means now we do need to supply these. So I can go with foreground, and let's change it. So we'll go with.
So you're not going to be able to use the hash symbol in a URL. Instead, you have to URL encode it, which is %23.
%23.
Yes.
All right, and then we're gonna go with background, and we'll do %23, and then let's see, that's Rebecca purple. So for contrast, we want white, I think. There we go.
So it took information from our URL, it created an HTML page, and it plopped that onto the page. We don't have to do it, but if you were to interrogate like the sources, you wouldn't find any like JavaScript here, right? This isn't like JavaScript has pulled that information from the URL into the page. It was a whole new HTML page that was created for us using these values. So I think that's incredibly cool.
It's yeah,
Uh,
this is I mean, and this is exactly what we wanted, right? We want to have no JavaScript. And when we look at the application tab here, like or not the application tab, we want the network requests. Let me clear this, reload again.
yeah.
There's no JavaScript in this cascade. Like it's not happening. I can pull it down here, we can actually see what's going on a little bit better. Lots of helpful things coming up in the but yeah, we have a document, we've got our two style sheets and a font. And that's all that's being loaded on this page.
Yeah.
No JavaScript.
Yep. And okay, that like it's not very fancy. It's also right now very incorrect because those two colors do not have a contrast ratio of 21:1 unless my
Mm-hmm.
math is horribly wrong. So, what say we add some ratios?
Let's add some ratios. And
Okay.
also, David is asking, when all the function code was generated, do we as developers have to set up deps, or is that all magic?
Uh, Both. Dependencies are mostly set up for you if you reference your dependencies in the eleventy.js config file or in a global data file, which is going to be a little awkward very shortly because we're going to use something called a template data file, which is like the one instance I found where we have to actually manage our own dependencies, which
Okay.
is fun. So let's go ahead and install a library to handle the ratio calculation for us. I like a library called get dash contrast.
Say again.
Get contrast, but with a hyphen. Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. And so now we have this. Let's go ahead and just because of that dependency management, just so we make sure that Eleventy picks this up and bundles up our dependency with the serverless function. Let's go into our .eleventy.js file and let's require get contrast, but not do anything with it. It's gross. I'm going to file an issue with Eleventy shortly, but for now, this is kind of a workaround we have to do to tell Eleventy that this is something we care about. Um, yep. And now, what we're going to do is we're going to need to find some way to transform our foreground and background properties into a ratio value. And when you have data like our foreground and your background, and you want to create something new with
Mm-hmm.
that data, you have really two options. There's a route called filters, which is basically functions that you can use in your templating syntax, or you can create computed data, which is new data that leverages the old data. It's a lot like the computed props in Vue. That's the way I prefer to do it. That's the cleaner way, in my personal opinion.
And it
So
also feels like, given that we have this data already, rather
mhm,
than because my issue that I've run into with filters is that I find myself having to pass data into the filter that I already had somewhere else,
yeah,
because I can't get it to, like, the filters don't access the data, and there's like I find myself jumping through hoops. And so computed data sounds very promising. I haven't really worked
yeah.
much with that.
So, if you're interested in learning more, there's a blog post I wrote about Eleventy Data Cascade in the chat. But to do this, we're going to create what's called a template data file. So next to the contrast.html, yeah, actually,
That's
like
this
let's
one here.
yes, if you scroll down, there's a table of contents, and there's actually a bit that tells you.
Where am I looking? Table of
There you
contents.
go.
Here we go.
Step 7, computed data. Yeah, so that's
Perfect.
that's what we're going to be doing. We're actually combining this with step 5, which is template data files. So next to your contrast.html, let's create a new file called contrast.11ty data.js. This is a magic name. It has to be exactly like this. The eleventy data.js tells eleventy that this is a file that is going to supply some data. And the fact that we've called it contrast will tell eleventy to link it with contrast.html. So this is a way for us to specifically provide data to be used within the contrast.html template. Um, so Yeah, we've got B Rob in the chat, and he and I spoke at the Eleventy meetup not long ago, the same day, and just afterwards he was like, "Oh, computed data finally makes sense."
Nice,
So
nice.
it's not always straightforward, but uh, let us go ahead. I've got my notes here. Um, let's go ahead and do const contrast equals require get contrast.
And thank you for the sub, Theo. I appreciate it.
Theo, hello. We are using ping right now.
We are
It's working like a charm. Um, let's do module.exports equals and then an object.
an object.
Yep. Yep, yep, yep. And in here, you can have a property called Eleventy computed. So this is how we signify to Eleventy that this is data that needs to be evaluated at the end of the data cascade using all of the other data that has been aggregated already. This is an object. And now let's create a new property in here called ratio. And this will be a function that receives a data argument. Yep. And in here, let's go ahead and destructure foreground and background off of data.eleventy.serverless.query.
Equals data.eleventy.query. That's it.
So it's eleventy.serverless.query.
Serverless.query.
Yep.
Got it. Okay.
And we're going to just console log foreground and background for now.
Just gonna copy paste these so I don't have to type them out twice.
You got it.
Okay.
Yep. And let's go ahead and save this, and we'll check our terminal. I'm going to tell you now that this is actually going to break. Yep.
Boom.
Oh no,
Explosion.
So it's saying can't find properties of undefined. It's trying to read query. So when you're dealing with computed data, I wanted to show this because this is a gotcha that tripped me up for so long. The night before I was due to give a talk about Eleventy Serverless for an event called the Eleventies, this right here was tripping me up so much. Computed data, Eleventy wants to calculate basically the order of dependencies because computed data can reference other computed data. So it has to basically evaluate ahead of time, like what is the natural order of the data that has to be evaluated. And that means it's going to try to evaluate your serverless data before you even have a serverless request. So what I would say is before you destructure, we're just going to do if not data.eleventy.serverless, return 1, maybe. Just say that the ratio is 1 if it's not a serverlessly invoked function. This should work for us.
Okay. Let's try again. No explosions.
Yep. And now let's go ahead and I guess go to
There's our foreground and background. Let me go back to the one where we added a foreground and background.
Yeah.
There we go.
So we've successfully pulled our foreground and background. So now we need to get the ratio. And to do this, we are going to return contrast.ratio. And we're going to pass it foreground and background. There we go. And let's go ahead and use this. So let's go into our contrast HTML template, and instead of 21.00, so we're still going to need the :1, but we're going to replace the with ratio, because that's what we just did. Is we just created a new data property called ratio, which is calculated from the foreground and background data.
Got it. Okay, I understand. All right, so now if I go out here and reload this,
it does kind of break layout wise, but this is functional.
It's functional. So if I go back to my, let's go up here and do the black. There's our 21.1. Okay. Yeah. So we can fix this though by going in here, and what we want to do.
So can I propose more computed data? It'll be nice and quick, but this will be data that now depends on our ratio data. So let's open up a new property in our Eleventy computed called formatted ratio.
Ah, I gotcha. And now this is where I think that gotcha is going to become more visible to me. If I put this above ratio, it would explode, right?
No,
It
no,
wouldn't.
because Eleventy pre-evaluates the dependency chain and it figures out what order things need to be in.
Oh, interesting. Okay. And so then
Yeah.
do I want to do the same thing here?
Um, no, because the only thing that this is going to depend on is the ratio property.
Okay.
We're going to have computed data that depends on our ratio computed data, and we just said, hey, if you need to panic, panic to the value of 1, which is a number. So formatted ratio is always going to be safe.
Oh, so if
basically.
it panics, it'll just be 1-to-1.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Yeah,
Gotcha.
I
Okay.
figured that was a safe, fairly straightforward thing to do. Okay, so let's return number, like capital N number, and then yep, we're gonna pass it data.ratio, and then after this, it's gonna be 2 fixed. Pass it 2 because after that, you don't really need any more decimal places of precision.
It's a lot of decimal places if you go if you go too far here.
Yeah,
So now we're going to say formatted ratio,
yeah.
and
You might, yeah. There you
now
go.
it's forcing it. And if I go to that one that we knew had a really long one, so 669933,
Nice, nice
there
and
we
clean.
go.
So good. Um, But okay, here's the thing. I don't actually find URLs all that easy to work with. Like it's better than nothing, but this isn't very complete to me because I want some nice easy navigation, right? I would like to be able to pick in this interface 2 colors and then just take me there, right? We're still going to
Mm-hmm.
do this without any client-side JavaScript.
Okay.
Because we're HTML developers, and we have access to the form element. So after our, so this is in our contrast.html. After our paragraph tag, let's go ahead and spin up a form element. This form element is going to have an action attribute. So if you're unfamiliar with kind of the like old way of doing forms from like the days before tools like React, the action attribute would tell basically like, oh man, what's the best way to explain it? It would send a request to this endpoint. And that endpoint would typically be a server that would respond with a new page, which is exactly what we want here. We want to tell our server to respond with a new page. That page is going to be /contrast/. So that's what we're going to put here in our action. And you can actually also pass to a method. The default method is lowercase get. But if we want to be explicit, we can do that ourselves. And lowercase get, I think. I think it actually does matter in this case,
Okay.
which is bizarre. And then I've got a few styles out of the box. So if you wouldn't mind, can we create a div with the class fields?
What was the class?
Fields.
Fields?
Yep. Yep. And in here, we're going to have 2 more divs, and each div is going to have a label and a color input. Yep. And we should absolutely make sure that this is accessible. So our label is going to have the an ID of let's say foreground and background, because that's what we're going to do is we're going to have users pick that. Yep. So ID is foreground and then name equals foreground. And then the label text should also say foreground. And then all of this similar for the
I'm
the
actually
background.
going to just do this one more time.
Once more with feeling.
All right. And then we can capitalize that one. All
And
right.
then let's have a submit button. This is going to be outside of our fields div. So
Okay.
yes. And let's just call this get ratio. You're going to see that there's already some neat styles here. However, oh, I might have broken something. Oh, well,
I'm zoomed in as well.
Okay.
Oh, no, I'm not.
I'm not going to spend time debugging the styles here. But yeah, let's go ahead and now use the 2 color pickers to select us a foreground and a background.
Okay, let's go with like a lightish purple and a darkish this is going to be real bad. You ready?
Mhm. Boom. All of this without any client-side JavaScript.
That is really nice. Can we also use the
Yes.
data to like
So
preset these?
yes. So let's go to each of our inputs and let's set value equals, and then curly braces, handlebars, double curly boys, whatever you want to call it, and then eleventy.serverless.query.foreground or .background.
And now it
Boom.
shows us our colors.
See,
Beauty.
nice and lovely. But we can, yeah. Let's go ahead and go to a new page. Like, let's use this. Let's go to a new page. And we've completely, without any client-side JavaScript, we've got a sense of state almost, which
Mm-hmm.
I absolutely dig. So
And like if I
let's,
hit back, it
yeah,
sticks. This is
yeah.
really nice.
So let's make this even better. I want to make a pretty demo. We've got enough time. Let's make this a pretty demo. In your contrast.html template, let's open up a style tag. And it doesn't really matter where you put this, so put it wherever you prefer. And in here, we're going to target the body, and we're going to give it a background image. And this is going to be a linear gradient. And I prefer minus 75 degrees.
Minus 75 degrees.
And then, yep. We might want to break these things out into new lines because things are going to get long. So even though we're in a style tag, this is still getting interpreted with all of our templating syntax. And so, comma, and then new line. And now double curly boys. 11t.serverless.query.background. And then after this, it's going to be 50%. And then comma. And then the same line down below, but with foreground. Boom. Keep going to some pages. Let me know what you think.
Look at this. This is cool. All right, let's do like a greenish, and then we'll come over here and do a let's see how offensive can we make these colors. I don't even, hold on. Chat, make it gross. What do I do? Let's go with let's go with like this brownish color, and then we can take it to like a mint green.
Ooh.
That's gonna be bad, right? Like that's gotta be a bad color. Let's go over here.
Incredible.
This is good stuff.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Hot dog stand colors. We can definitely do that.
Oh yes. Then what say we deploy this?
Oof, that is aggressive.
it is truly aggressive. However, right. It does meet color contrast requirements for large text.
It does do that. Okay, so for me to deploy this, I'm going to need to fork it, I think. So
yeah.
Let me fork.
And oops. For anyone else who's using the template repo, there is a green like use this template button that you can use. So that way you'll get like not even a fork, but just straight up your own project with this. So yeah.
Okay, so we've got an origin upstream of or an origin repo of mine, an upstream repo of yours, and if I git add everything, we can say git commit and say add serverless contrast checker, and we'll git push upstream origin main, off it goes. Okay, and then I can netlify init, and I want to create and configure a new site. I'm gonna put this on mine. We'll call this 11t serverless contrast checker. Oh, this is gonna get weird. Let's see.
I'll go ahead and answer a question from the chat. I do have both a stream and a Twitter. Let me put links to those in the chat. But if you're interested in stuff like this, I have a weekly Twitch stream called Some Antics that I would love to see you in the chat for. While we're deploying this. There we go. Hopefully that helps, Remy.
Yes. Let me. We've got here's Ben's Twitter, and here is the Twitch stream. And I think, does my shout out command still work? Let's find out.
Let's find out.
It does.
Hey.
All right. So that is pushed. Good. All right. And then I can go out to, let's go look at the site here. It's building.
Hopefully this should work.
Da da da. So that built nice and fast. The whole site built in 541 milliseconds. Process.
Yeah.
I just said processing. Channeling my Sean Connery for some reason. Yes, let's deploy this serverless website. 49 seconds. That thing is live on the internet. Here we go. Here's our contrast checker. Let's try.
Click that get started link. Oh yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
Oh yeah, we got to get started link.
There we go. Cool.
Heyo. All right, let's try a new one. This one's gonna fail contrast.
Yeah, very much so.
All right, y'all. So now you can go and play with this. It's working.
And if you're ever curious about how the math behind this is working, the single most important factor in our color contrast algorithms is relative luminance, which basically means is one color light and one color is dark. So even you can have like a red and a blue, which like I can see, right? Like I can tell that they're very different colors, but the hue matters a lot less than the actual lightness versus darkness of the colors. See, this is a really low color contrast, even though to my eyes, at least, these are blatantly different colors. It's not about how different they are. It's about how readable one color is versus the other. And to do that well, you basically need to have one light and one dark.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. We've got a request from the chat for one that I assume is going to be really hard to look at. So let's start there. And then we're going to add, what's this one? We're doing 11. Ooh, this is gonna be rough. Ooh, that's.
While we're over here celebrating the Fairly Odd Parents, right? Listen, you brought the youths. I am not ripe in my age. I have a ways to go, and I have so many more like just 90s late 90s kid nostalgia here. This is what you've wrought into this world, Jason, is giving me a platform to do Fairly Odd Parents jokes.
I love it. I'm so on board with this.
Let's see. I think we have enough time if we want to do a stretch goal for caching these pages.
Absolutely. Let's do it.
Okay. So let's and we're going to kind of speed run this, and I think we're actually going to do this by having a separate template for cached pages that overall is going to function identically. So step one, let's go to our Eleventy.js, and we're going to add a new instance of the serverless bundler plugin. I would call this name cached. You can call it whatever you want. If you look at like the serverless docs on Eleventy's documentation page, they use Possum to indicate that you can call this whatever you want, but cached I think works for me. And then let's go ahead and create a contrast cached.html maybe. Now this is going to be different in that when you're using Netlify's on-demand builders to cache things, you don't have access to query parameters. Those are totally strict, which means we're going to have to provide a different way of doing things. So step one, yep, we replaced that with cached. And then our new route, let's call this like, let's remove the /contrast/. Let's call this like ODB for on-demand builders. And then after this, it's going to be :foreground / background. And these are our two arguments. And then everywhere where you see eleventy.serverless.query here, we need to replace that .query with .path.
Okay.
And then next up, we need to make sure that it has access to the same data as you would have in the contrast.html. So we're going to copy over our, yep, this is going to be contrast cached.
Okay.
Once again, instead of .query, this is .path, which I think you only change on line 10. And finally, we need to go to our serverless function that's been created here.
I think I need to stop and restart to get it right.
Yes. We'll also need to add a whole bunch of the serverless function
Oh,
stuff
whoops,
into our
that was
getting
the wrong thing. I wanted netlify dev.
There we go.
Okay, so now I have netlify, cached, index.
Okay. We also, I forgot about this step. At the very bottom, it actually tells you how to make this use on-demand builders, which is this commented block here. So you're going to comment out line 52. You're going to uncomment 54 and 55. And then it tells you that you also need to install @netlify/functions. Yep.
Okay.
And we're not going to be able to validate this locally because on-demand builders, at least the caching aspect of on-demand builders, doesn't work locally. We would instead want to validate that through a deploy. But what we've done here is we've instead provided a new way for us to access these pages. We say /odb/1 hex code / a second hex code, and this will be cached. Now we have to provide that new path because we don't have access to query parameters anymore. Another thing that you'll find won't work anymore is our form, because we would need to reshape the URL.
Yes.
Do we want to do that real quick?
Yeah, we got time. Let's do it. So down here.
Yes, let me get my notes up for this again because. All right, so let's open up a script tag.
Okay.
Let's query select our form and let's save it as like color pickers or form or something. Form's better. Yes, I like that. Yep.
We've only got one, so we can be pretty loosey goosey with our selector.
Yep. Form.add event listener. Submit. This takes. Yep. We're gonna event.prevent default. Yep. And then const values equals object.from entries. New form data. Form. Yep. Like that. And then const foreground equals values.foreground.replace. So this is going to give us the color, like the hex codes with an octathorpe, right? And we can't have those in our URL. We can't have those pound signs in our URL. So we have to replace it with the URL encoded version. So replace the pound sign with %23.
Okay.
And similarly for background.
Okay.
All right. And then window.location.href equals, and we can open up a template string here, /odb/ the foreground / the background. If all has worked according to plan, did you include a trailing slash in your permalink?
I did, I think. Let me double check. Yes.
Yes. Okay, cool. Cool. So this should work. And I think we can validate this locally. Like it's going to generate, like the only thing that won't work locally is the caching.
Is the caching, right? So we can run it. Here we go, netlify dev. And that's going to fire up all of our functions and stuff. And we can even see here that it's like, you know, it's firing up the serverless files and doing all that good stuff. Here's our functions. And then when we come out here, we go to ODB and we'll do like %23 1 2 3 4 5 6, and it does the thing. And if I change it,
the form should still work. Fingers crossed.
It does.
Nice. All right. What say we YOLO this? Yeet it up to
yeet. All right, chat. You got the yeet emote now too. Also, followers get emotes. So for no money, just for following on Twitch, you should get special emotes for the channel. So you know, maybe click that follow button and make some noise. Look at that yeet. I
Incredible.
love it. All right, here we go. We're going to git add everything. Double check that we only committed what we did. I added the cached non-index files to our git ignore. So then I'm going to git commit everything, and we'll say feat add ODB support.
Yep.
And then we're going to get push. And if we come back out here, we can see here that it automatically started building because we pushed to GitHub. This should take us hopefully even less than 49 seconds this time, because now we've got some caching.
Yep. In the meantime, I kind of want to talk about some other use cases for serverless I've seen. Both Stephanie Eccles and Brian Robinson, who have been in the chat today, have leveraged Eleventy Serverless to add like search pages to their site, because those take arbitrary input and return arbitrary output. They both blog on Eleventy sites, so this is a fairly natural fit. I know that there have been a couple of other experiments in this regard. I've been trying to push it to the absolute limits by building an on-demand Twitch chat generator, like themed Twitch chat generator, using Eleventy Serverless that takes like arguments through the URL to provide different logic. So there is a wide variety of things you can do, and I think the more people kind of see how this stuff works. Hey, oh, I see. We gotta do the.
Let's clean up a little bit. Go to one of these. Go to one of these.
And then ODB instead of contrast.
ODB, that's right.
Oh
no matching URL found. How dare you? Wait, why didn't that work?
That's a great question. I'm not
no matching URL found.
Caught up about it, but that is. Let's see. Interesting. This is maybe one of the like not to end on like the note of like an error state, but like this is one of the rooms for growth that I think Eleventy Serverless does actually have, which is that it can be very difficult to debug when your Eleventy Serverless functions go awry. And this part I did not.
I think I figured out what went wrong. I think we've got a note for Zach, which is that the generated, it needs to include builders.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
So let's try this one more time, and if this one doesn't work, then we'll open it up and dig into it. But yeah, it might just be that we need to do a bump to like the latest patch version of Eleventy to get that sorted. But let's. Did I push? I don't think I pushed. Oh, I needed to actually add.
Yes.
There we go.
But yeah, like even if the on-demand builder stuff doesn't work, like we had what I would consider a fully functioning app that even maintained state across pages, had some nice navigation, all without requiring client-side JavaScript to be sent over the wire. I don't want to pretend like having zero client-side JavaScript is inherently a virtue. However, I think it does create more lightweight experiences, more cacheable experiences. Things are a little less likely to break. And also, I really like that we built navigation that didn't depend on JavaScript to work. Like all of that was, even if the CSS had failed or whatever, like everything there was totally functional. And I think that is really neat. So we'll see if this works. Might not, and that's okay.
Okay, so we have missed a step somewhere for reasons I don't that are not immediately apparent. Also looks like it's running them as functions. Does it say on-demand builders anywhere? I'm wondering if we might just have something a little off kilter here.
Totally
So we will have to dig into exactly what went wrong there. We will publish the fix once we get it sorted. And in the meantime, we can rely on this very cool setup like this, where this is working.
Yeah.
Right? And so y'all can go play with that to your heart's content. See how shocking you can make those color contrast combos. But Ben, this has been fantastic. Let me do a quick shout out to a couple things here. This show, like all of our shows, is being live captioned. We've had Ashley with us here all day from White Coat Captioning, so thank you very much. That's available in the stream text player until I fix the homepage. And our captioning and other show costs are covered by our sponsors, Netlify, NX, and Backlight. Thank you all so much for kicking in to make this show better than it could be if I was on my own. While you're looking at things on the site, make sure you go and look at the schedule. This is there's so much good stuff coming up. I don't have time to read through it, but just go read through it. You can add it on Google Calendar to get all those details. Make sure you go and follow Ben. Ben, if people want to dig in deeper, we've got a handful of links here to the Eleventy data cascade and some other things. Is there anywhere else that you want people to go and look at?
Yeah, so I would say that the documentation is at eleventy.dev. I think it's always getting better. I also want to call out that there is an Eleventy Discord server. That is a great place to ask questions. Twitter's good. You can reach me on Twitter. I stream weekly at Semantics Dev. And yeah, there's also an Eleventy meetup. If you go to 11tymeetup.dev, this is a monthly meetup for people who are just really interested in Eleventy. They're always looking for new speakers. So if you want to learn or if you want to speak there, you should absolutely take a look at that. Yes, Stephanie's exactly right. There's an open CFP. Please send the team your talk ideas. I've previously given this talk. Actually, I gave this talk in 10 minutes at an event called Eleventies, but I've also talked here at the Eleventy meetup about the data cascade and some of the internal workings of Eleventy. So there's tons of great resources, and more resources are getting added all the time. Now that Eleventy is at 1.0 and Netlify is sponsoring its development full time. Thank you so much, Netlify. I think you're only going to see more and more of that as time goes on. So there's tons of places to learn about Eleventy and what's going on in that space.
Here we go. This is we're going all in on open source, and this is really, really exciting. And yeah, okay, Ben. So many good resources today. Super exciting stuff. I love what we were able to build. And as always, it's been a pleasure having you on. Chat, stay tuned. We're going to go find somebody to raid. Thank you all so much for hanging out, and we will see you all next time.
Bye, y'all.